Hey friends, it's Laura with Laura's Handmade Haven. Welcome and welcome back. I'm so glad you joined me today. This is week 2 for our Let's Bake Quilt Sew Along. This quilt was designed by Lori Holt. The fabrics I'm using for my quilt are scraps, leftovers from multiple Lori Holt fabric lines. All the fabrics are manufactured by Riley Blake. So you're going to see a lot of different collections and a lot of different patterns and fabrics as we move along through this sew along. So what I want to do first is just remind you that I do have that organizational cheat sheet put together for you. A link is in the description box below, so make sure you go and check that out. I'm going to update that sheet every week as I work my way through the quilt, just so you know which simple shapes you need, the sizes to cut your fabric, how much bias tape, what size to cut your backgrounds, all of those things. So this week, we are going to focus on several different blocks. We're going to do the white measuring cup, the pink measuring cups, the little red teaspoon, and that glorious mixer. I'm so excited about the mixer, you guys, because, okay, so I have a KitchenAid mixer, and I call it the magic mixer because it is amazing. I've had it for, oh goodness, 18 years. It's still going strong. My mom has one that she got when I don't even know if I was born yet. The first thing we're going to do is just kind of walk through how I cut my fabrics, how I selected them, and then we'll go to the sewing machine. We'll sew our shapes. I'll turn out a few of them. So if there's any tips and tricks I can share, we'll make some bias tape. We'll lay out our blocks. We'll applicate them. We'll have the reveal. So that's like the whole span. Now these videos will probably be a little longer than my normal videos just because I do want to just cover all of that information, because that way if you're looking for information on a specific block, you can go to that video and get the information for that block and not having to piece things together. So let's talk fabric and cutting first. I have 2 design boards for this week. This design board actually has 3 of the blocks laid out on it. What I did was I just looked at the white measuring cup and I cut my shapes, and all of that information is in the organizational cheat sheet. So again, make sure you download that. And I decided that I would leave these 2 shapes together, and I just found a piece of fabric that both those shapes I'll sew them onto. Now, this little shape here is actually the inner part of the handle. So if you are using scraps like I am, make sure you get the same background fabric as your measuring cup is going to be on. The little inside of the handle, you want that to match the background of your block. If you're following the cutting guide and you've matched up your fabrics, then it's going to walk you through that and you have nothing to worry about. But like I said, I'm using scraps, so I had to think through some of those things as I go along. The next thing up was a little red teaspoon, and that one's pretty simple. It's just one little circle, and I'm going to make a little bit of bias tape. And I did go ahead and cut the bias tape so it will be the same color as my spoon. Now they could definitely be a coordinating fabric or, you know, something completely different. You could have a red spoon with a blue handle. Customize this however you want. I'm just going to leave it all one color just for my quilt. Then we also have the pink measuring cups. They're down here. I have a cute little white with pink print background. And then again, I cut some strips for my bias tape, and all 3 of these shapes will fit on my one piece of fabric. And that's just something that I thought I would share with you. If you, instead of cutting separate pieces of fabric for every single shape, if you wanted to, you could gather the shapes that are going to be the same color, same fabric, lay them on your fabric and cut one square around it, and then you just sew all of your Sew Simple shapes to that one piece of fabric rather than having lots of tiny pieces of fabric at your sewing table. Okay, so the other block this week is that gorgeous mixer. Now the mixing bowl, this is another place where you can customize this. So just like look through your fabrics if you're using scraps and pick your favorite. So I am trying to kind of stay in the same color families because the original quilt was designed and all the colors are evenly dispersed throughout the quilt, and it gives it a really nice look. So what I've decided I'm going to do is I'm going to try to stay in the same color family, but obviously I'm not going to have the same fabrics. So I do have my cute little bowl down here, and I have my bias tapes cut for the mixer. But in addition to that, I have a modification for my mixer block. I am not going to use Rick Rack and Oral Fill floss to make that power cord. I'm going to use 1/4-inch bias tape, and that's what this strip, this fabric here is for that 1/4-inch bias tape for my power cord. And then up here you have a few different pieces of fabric. Again, I wanted to go ahead and just put my shapes on one piece of fabric up here. So all 3 of these are the same color. using the same fabric, so they're laid on there together, and there's the base of the machine. And then this piece here is actually two pieces. So when you look at your Sew Simple shapes, look at that. There's a mark on there, and you want to put those marks on your Pellon as well, because that way you will know where to line up this contrasting piece of fabric when you go to line up your shape. But these will get sewn together first before we piece this part. And we actually need to make our bias tape for this too, because there's a piece of bias tape that also goes on the head of the mixer here. So we are going to, we're going to change up our order a little bit. We're going to go ahead and make our bias tape, and then we're going to do our sewing because we need that bias tape for our mixer. While the iron heats up, we're going to talk a few little tips about bias tape. When I cut my bias tape strips, I like to go ahead and cut a point on one end, and that's just so when I'm running it through my bias tape maker, it just gives it a little easier way to get that through. The other handy dandy little tool you can have on your ironing board is a pin, because when we go to put this through the little bias tape maker, sometimes it doesn't want to slide out the other end, but there is a little cutout here. You can just take your pin and help your fabric and just push it out and then grab the little point, and we'll get that started. Now, I did not have fabric that was long enough to one strip of this for the pink measuring cups, so I have 3 little strips to run through. Same thing with the power cord. I didn't have a piece of fabric that was long enough, the fabric that I wanted to use, so I have 2 pieces there, and I'll show you how I will hide that when we go to put our power cord onto our mixer. So you just, slide your bias tape maker down the strips of fabric while you're moving your iron over the piece of fabric, and then let it sit for just a second. And now we have 1 strip done. So I'm going to get the rest of these done, and then we will go to the sewing table. We're at the sewing machine. I have already sewn the pieces for the white measuring cup and the red teaspoon. Those were all very straightforward. Now we're on the pink measuring cups, and those you're going to do a little modification to the original shapes. You're going to take off 1 inch, 3/4 of an inch, and 1/2 of an inch off of the large, medium, and small ovals. So I am not going to sew the entire oval. I'm only going to sew a little past where this cut line is, because when we turn out the shape and we put the bias tape on there, you're not going to see that cut edge. So there's no reason to sew that entire oval and turn an oval out when we could just turn out like this little egg cup shape. All right, so this is what we're going to do. I am going to start right here, and I'm just going to sew down, and I am going to do a little back stitch. And then I'm just going to sew around this first 2/3, I guess, of an oval. Let me get these other little shapes off of there. And again, I'm just going to do a little back stitch there, and I'm going to jump over here and do the same thing. Now, if you are delicate when you turn your shapes, you probably wouldn't need to do that back stitch, but I just don't want to have to worry about it. So that's why I'm going to go ahead and add it. And here is an example of cutting 1 piece of fabric for my 3 shapes. Let's move on to our mixer. The accent fabric is going to be on this end of the mixer, and we have a piece of bias tape that goes across here. So what we're going to do is just take our piece of bias tape, and I like to lay this out because that way I know that I have it on the right side. Now, you can glue baste this into place, which I am going to do. I use Eileen's tacky glue, and I just want to make sure this is going to be where I want it. High enough on the machine, on the head of the mixer. All right, and since this fabric is, now I'm not going to run a complete line there because it's not necessary. I'm just going to put a few little dots. Then we're just going to line those edges up. I'm going to change my machine to use a 1/4 inch. Now, in all honesty, it doesn't really matter if you don't use a 1/4 inch here. As long as you have enough of that accent fabric, you'll be fine. Now I'm going to cut off the excess bias tape, lay that to the side. And now on this, what I'm going to do, since we have that bias tape stuck in that seam, typically I would turn this back. So the accent fabric would have the seam going the other way. But since that bias tape is in there, just to reduce bulk on my shape, I'm going to make sure that it's pressed to the accent fabric. So just do a little finger press there. And you can definitely pin this in place if you want. I am just going to eyeball it, kind of look through the Pellon and make sure I have a straight line down there with my background fabric. And I'm actually going to start down there too. Let's make sure we put our machine back on the right stitch. We have 2 ovals for the mixer. One of them is like a little, I think it's like the little bowl lift handle or something. And then the other one is the plug. Both of them are out of this fabric. The plug, you're going to, eventually she has you cut off 1 inch of the plug. But what I have done is I've gone ahead and marked my Sew Simple shape so I know that this is the part I'm not sewing, this is the part I am sewing, and I've just drawn my line across there. So I'm going to go ahead and just sew that shape that I need rather than having to go back and sew on that oval again. You have 1 more shape and then we will be ready to start turning them out. On these shapes, you're just going to trim around them about 1/8 to 1/4 of an inch around the outside of your stitch line. And then we will cut a little piece through the interfacing and just flip the shape out. Most of these are very easy. On the white measuring cup, on the corners, you're going to angle it. And that's just going to reduce the bulk in your shape when you go to turn it out. It's just going to give you a flatter corner and a better result for your quilt. Now for these, I'm just going to begin by just cutting all of that excess fabric off. And now I'm just going to cut around the lower part. Now that's going to leave this top edge here open, which will be really nice for turning here in just a minute. And I may go back, I will. I'll go back and trim those up just a little bit better than that on the cut line. I just wanted to get most of that excess off. And then I will cut right where my drawn line was, so I have them at the right height. Those are the pink measuring cups. Again, on those points here, you're just going to cut across, angle across the corner just to reduce that bulk. Now, if you want, you can do a couple little clips in this little swoop that's in this mixer stand. It's a pretty easy curve, so you probably wouldn't necessarily have to, but it may help just smooth that shape out just a little bit more than it would have otherwise. Again, angling across the corner. And we are going to clip this inner curve just a few spaces. I'm going to make sure that's really nice and smooth for us. This oval is far on the mixer, but you don't need all of it. So I'm just going to do that to make my turning easier. And then this is the plug. So if you watched week 1, you will know that I use a few different tools. I love my Fiskars Micro Tip Sharp Scissors. And I also love the Clover 2-point turner. And I do have a double-ended stiletto and seam ripper that I use for this as well. But I start with my scissors and I just simply go through just the interfacing, not the fabric, make a little cut, and then you can just turn out your shapes. Pretty easy peasy. All right, so obviously this does not look very good, right? No. So we use our 2-point turner, we go in the corners, I'm pressing against the fabric, not the interfacing, and just smooth down the sides. And this is gonna look a lot better already, and it will look even better once we press it. So that shape is done. This is the plug, so it is sewn on all of its edges. So I do have to cut through the interfacing for it and work it out. Grab the 2-point turner to get those corners pushed out really well. Now, this is the piece that goes on the mixer, and I just cut off part of it because we don't need it all. So this one I can just push out. I don't have to cut through the interfacing or anything, obviously, because it's open on the one end. And this raw edge will be hidden underneath the top part of the mixer. So it doesn't even matter that it's not straight on the top there because we'll hide that with the top of the mixer. This one's a little trickier because it's got this long little tail on it, but we'll try to get it turned, and then we'll use our 2-point turner and press against the fabric side. And sometimes you need to work it back up instead of pushing this all the way down. See how I have this, like it's kind of stationary, and I'm just working the fabric up to it to get this other end. Sometimes it gets too narrow to get this whole tool all the way down to that end. So that's just a little trick that you might bring into your bag of tricks. And then this will look a lot better once it is pressed, because I did get a little close to my interfacing here just by pushing that end out. So it's kind of flipping on me right now, but when I go to press it, before I lay these blocks out, I will make sure to turn that in. All right. All right, the one thing that I did not mention because I did not notice was that the white measuring cup needs to be traced in reverse for that shape. So just make sure that you're aware of that. I have updated the cheat sheet so you know that this one is a reversed shape, because we also use that same shape for the sifter later on. So yeah, that'll be fun. So I get to redo my shape, I guess is what I'm saying. All right, so the first thing we're gonna do for our little measuring cup is we're going to trace on the lines for the measuring cup. And the reason I want to do that now is just because that way it's done, right? I don't have to do that later. And I am just going to turn my light pad on. This is a Cricut light pad. If you don't have a light pad, don't go out and buy one just for this, all right? But you can use your window, it'll be fine. But if you have one, this would be a great time to use it. And I am using a Sewline 3-color pen. I will put the link in the description box below. I really like this pen. It has white, pink, and a pencil choice on it. So, all right. So those are the lines, and I put those on there just because it's easier to trace it at this point through just these 2 layers than through all of them with the background fabric on there. All right, let's grab our measuring cup background. This block is 4.5 inches once we trim it down. I'm just going to kind of line up my measuring cup on there. And I'm also going to line up the little handle. This goes behind, obviously, and so does the handle. It can tuck in just a little bit there. And then I'm going to grab a 4.5-inch ruler just to make sure that everything is good. And it is. I mean, I could, yeah, it's fine just the way it is. All right, so I'm just going to glue baste that into place. And again, I use Eileen's tacky glue. There are definitely applique glues on the market, and you should use them if you want. Now, even though this little background fabric is in there, if you were color matching your threads to your fabrics, I would go ahead and use the white or whatever color you're using for all of this. I'm just using dark brown for all of my applique, so I will just use all of it all around there. So this one is ready to applique as soon as it dries. Next up is the red teaspoon. This finishes at 2.5 by 4.5. I did press these shapes before I had you join me, so just know that those are pressed. Now, one thing you could do on this one is you could take this and either finger press or use your iron to find the middle. That's going to help you keep your teaspoon handle straight. And then since this is going to be 2.5 by 4.5, I like leaving 1/2 inch above and below my shapes in the block. So I'm just going to kind of measure this down. And actually, the first thing I'm going to do is just take a little bit of glue, fold that back, and that's going to be the end of my handle. And then I'm going to move this over just a little bit where that finger press line is, and I'm just going to put a couple little dots of glue going down, leaving that at 1/2 inch above my shape, and then I'm going to line up the bottom of my handle at 1/2 inch, center it on that line, and then cut off the excess. Now, if this was longer, I would keep it, but it's pretty small, so that's getting tossed. Now I'm going to fold this back, put a little dot, fold this back, sneak that under, and there is my red teaspoon block. All right, the pink measuring cups basically are going to be like this in a 4.5-inch square. Now, if we do this, I want to make sure that my bottom measuring cup is 1/2 inch in from the side and the bottom. And that will be pretty good. So I'm going to go ahead and glue baste this one into place. And then I'll adjust the other ones based on that. The handle lengths are in the cutting guide and also on her blog. And this bottom one, I'm going to make it the full width of the block that I want. And then since this gets sewn on top, I'm just going to put a few dots along there. Get the other two handles on there. Now you can make your handles the same length or you can make them different lengths. I'm going to make mine a little different. Okay, I'm just going to check this again just to make sure I'm pretty good on my size. So it's going to be a little tight, but it won't be too bad. And I could, to fix that, I'm going to trim this one off just a little bit more. Okay, so that makes me happy, and this will just hang out and wait for me to applique it. Now let's move on to the mixer. All right, so I like using either a pressing mat like this. This one is made by Cricut, or a wool pressing mat to press my shapes, because you can actually heat up the mat before you put your shapes on there. Now, I didn't do that this time, but you can. And then you get heat from both sides, and it gives you a really nice, crisp press for your shapes. This does finish 10 by 12, so it'll be 10 and a half by 12 and a half. I do have a 12 and a half inch ruler here beside me. And remember, we have that cord to put over on the side over here. So I'm going to use the bowl for the left-hand side of the block, and I'll start building from that point over. So let me go ahead and get that glue basted down. That's going to be kind of like anchor point. And then we do have bias tape for this one as well. Remember, we are going to be using bias tape instead of ribbon for our cord. And then we also have some bias tape pieces that we need to cut for the machine itself. So this is the head of the machine, and here is the little stand. Now the stand should be level with the bottom of the bowl. So that's the next thing we're going to put into place, is just this little stand. Okay, so here's the bottom of our bowl. So we just need to move this up just a smidge. Not much, but just a smidge. And then the next thing we're going to do is use our little cute piece here. And we're just going to put a little dot of glue here. And that's going to go right like that. This is going to cover that up. And I do want to check and make sure the top of my machine is level as well with the bottom, and it is. And then the handle, that looks good. Good, good, good. All right, so we have a few pieces of bias tape to put on here. The first one, it calls for a 2-inch piece, but you're going to actually take it and both ends get turned back. And I'm just going to do that about 1/4 inch. And then this gets glued right in here. There is actually a little template in Sew Along Guide that shows you where to put that. And then we also have the base of the machine. Now, it may seem weird to have this base over the bowl, but I have a KitchenAid, and I love it. And the bowl actually kind of sits down into this little concave area. So when you look at it, you don't actually see the bottom of the bowl. So this would be accurate. Now this is supposed to be around 9 inches. If you want to measure that out, feel free. I'm going to wing it. And you can do this one of two ways. You can either take your chalk pencil and draw the line, or you can just take your bias tape and leave the guide underneath it. I don't know if you can see that. I can see the line really well. And I will tell you, this would have been easier if I would have taken the time to make actual bias tape. This is straight grain, so it is going to be a little more difficult to get those loops in there. So if you're going to follow my lead and do this, maybe make yourself some bias tape. Okay, so my bias tape is not long enough, and so in order to fix that, I am going to cut it right where I'm going to go over that, because that will be hidden by the next piece. And I'll just splice it in right there. What I'm doing to compensate for not having true bias tape is after I get the little loop formed, I'm just taking my iron and heat pressing it just to kind of smush down the fabric. And my cord is going to have kind of a textured look, and I like it, so I'm good with it. Like I said, if you want a really smooth finish on this and you want to use bias tape, then definitely use cross grain. True bias tape, not straight. The last thing I got to do is just tuck that little tail under. And now this block is ready to applique for the most part, except the one final thing that I'm going to do. I'm going to take that bias tape again, and I'm going to fold it in half. So I have like double fold bias tape. And this is what I'm going to make my plug-ins out of. And you could do this with gray if you wanted to instead, but this is, it's a playful quilt, so it'd be fine. So I'm going to just cut me a couple lengths. And yes, those are cut ends that I'm using there, but it's not going to matter because they're so small that it'll be fine. And those are my little plug-ins. Yay. All right, so our blocks are laid out. Now it's time to applique. So we will head back to the sewing machine. And actually, I take that back. We're going to do the embroidery on the white measuring cup first, and then we'll do applique. All right, so my neighbors decided this is a great time to mow his lawn. But anyway, I have pink thread loaded into my machine, and I have it on a buttonhole stitch, basically. So I'm just going to start by doing all of these lines. And I'm going to do the shorter lines first. So I'm going to go on, do this one and this one and this one, and then I'll go and do this long line starting here all the way up and around on both sides. So that's kind of the idea, and we will get it going. Now on this turn, I want to be on the right hand side because that way when I turn it, it will cover up the stitches I just made. And then it also gets me in line to get all the ends of those first three little lines. And again, on the right hand side, and I'll turn it. And then we have one side of our little measuring cup done, and I'll go ahead and do the other side now. I didn't mention this is a modification to the original design. The original design has you doing hand stitching for this. I just would rather do machine stitching, so that's what I'll be doing for most of this quilt. All right, now on all of these blocks, that is all of the hand stitching or the embroidery stitching that we have to do. So now we can just switch our threads to that dark brown color and start doing our applique. Okay, I try to say this in every video, but just in case, I am using a very small zigzag stitch for my applique. I put it on a zigzag and then I move it down to 1.8 wide and 0.9 long. The first thing I'm going to do on this little measuring cup is the handle. So in order to keep it so I don't have to break my stitch, I'm going to start on this inner circle, and then I'll applique around and then down and then back out, and then I'll stop, and then I'll do the outside of the measuring cup. This is why when you're gluing, you don't want to glue this completely down because it allows me to flip that measuring cup up out of my way, the main body of it, and I can get to this little circle and to the handle. Now again, if you are color matching your threads to your fabrics, if you are doing this block, I would still do this handle all the same color as what you're going to be using for your measuring cup, just because you want to accent the measuring cup, not the background fabric. So I wouldn't use a background fabric color for that inner circle because you're outlining the handle, making that little handle pop. And on these, just like as I've told you before, circles are a little tricky. Just go slow, be patient with yourself, and you'll get it. Just stop and pivot as much as you need. All right, and I'll tuck all that in there. And you could trim this circle down. I might actually do that because, well, it just reduces some bulk in my block. Cut that circle off a little bit. All right, so now I'm going to start up here on the corner, and I am going to start with a stay stitch. And I'm just going to zigzag down and around. On the corner, I'm going to stop on the right-hand side. That's just going to give me a really nice turn. And then I will also, I'm going to finish on the left hand with the zigzag, and I am going to finish with the stay stitch. And we have our first block done. Well, it needs trimmed, but it's done. Let's go on to the little teaspoon. Now the teaspoon, I'm going to say that we're going to do the handle first. So we're going to start underneath that teaspoon, that little circle, go down and around, break our thread, and then we'll do the circle. This is another pretty quick and easy block. Now I know some of you are saying that circle's not easy. They get easier, just need some practice. Start with a stay stitch. See how I'm stopping and pivoting as much as I need to? That's what you do too. Now we have our pink measuring cups. Now these, I glued my bias tape down pretty good. So I am actually going to do these a little differently than I normally would. I am going to start on the lower corner here. I'm going to go around the handle first. Now when I get here, I stopped on the left-hand side, and I'm going to very slowly go around the base of the cup, of the measuring cup. Now, the only one we have left is this great big mixer. So I have taken all of the hand embroidery out of this mixer because, well, I just didn't want to do it. So I made my little plug-ins out of bias tape, double fold bias tape, 1/4 inch. And then I also made my little beater bars over here out of the 1/4 inch bias tape. Now, if you wanted, you could definitely make this and this out of a gray rather than the red. I liked it, so it's fine. The first thing I'm going to do on this entire piece is these little beaters. And then I will be able, and basically when you look at a block that has this many shapes and layers, I like appliquing from the bottom up for the most part. So I'm going to do the beaters, and then I'm going to do this little piece here. And then I'm going to go ahead and do this piece here. And then I'll probably do the bowl and the stand and the plug ends and the cord, and then I'll do, and this up here, the little handle, and then I'll do the head, the plug, and this bias trim that's at the bottom, because those are like my top layers. So I like to go bottom up because that way you can kind of hide things. So for this one, I am going to start with this little handle piece up here. I'm just going to flip this head of the mixer back, and that way I can start right here. There's no reason to applique this edge here because it's going to be held down by the mixer head and you're not going to see it, so it's fine. And then when this folds down and that bowl goes up, you don't see any of those jump stitches. So that's just another little time-saving tip for you. If you can hide it, hide it. Now the bias tape, I'm not going to worry about this top edge because again, the head of the mixer is going to hide that. So I'm just going to worry about the other three sides. Again, not worrying about the top because it's going to be hidden. Doesn't need to be secured. The rest of it will secure it in place. Now, I'm not going to lie. These are going to be a little tricky because they're tiny and they're thick. So we'll go a little slower. And then on the end here, I'm actually going to do a satin stitch like we did on the white measuring cup, just because that is a raw edge. All right, for the cord, since we have these little overlaps, you want to make sure that you start at the opposite end that you began. So I can sew all the way around here, stop, I'll skip, sew all the way around here, stop and skip, all the way around, stop and skip, and so on, then all the way back. All right, so this is going to be quite the journey, but we'll get it done. And we'll stop here, lift our needle, drop our needle, stay stitch, continue. I have some strings to cut, then I'll get all these blocks pressed, and then we'll trim them up and we'll have a reveal. All right, we're going to do the easy ones first. That's the pink and the white measuring cups. We're just going to put the 4.5 inch square back on our block, how we laid it out, which was 1/2 inch all around. Same thing for the white one, except this one, we have about 1/2 inch above and below, and about, what would that be, 5/8 of an inch on the sides. Now you can leave these little labels on your blocks if you want to. I'm probably going to be taking mine off. Okay, so the next one we have is the red teaspoon. And remember, we made it so we'd have 1/2 inch above and below. 1/2 of 2.5 is 1 1/4. So if you put the 1/4 mark right down the middle of your spoon handle and then line up the 1/8 marks on either side of that, then you know that you are good and centered. Remember to watch the top and bottom. And now we're just going to flip that around, move it to the 2.5 inch mark, and we have that block trim down. Okay, now for the big one. Okay, so our mixer is 10.5 by 12.5. So we are going to take a 12.5-inch square, and we're going to kind of line it up here and see what we think. To get to, and this is where I have to change my ruler so I can see. Okay, to get to 10.5, this is right here. So that's a good inch above. So we want to move with 1/2 inch down here. So if we move this to 3/4 down here, then we should have 3/4 up there. So our mark down here for the base of our mixer will be 3/4 of an inch. And then we're just going to look to see where we're at on the sides and just center that. And we're at right at 5/8, I think. Is that right? No, 7/8. So 7/8 above and on the sides and 3/4 on the bottom. And we'll make our cuts on 3 sides of our ruler. And then we'll move our ruler so we can get that final cut. So we have it down to 10.5 by 12.5. All right, and then it's a 12.5-inch ruler, so I can put that on the 2 down here. And that will be 10.5 up there. All right, so let's put these on the design wall and do our wrap up. So here are our blocks on the design wall. I just want to point out which blocks we made today. So we made this lovely mixer. Oh my gosh, I love this mixer. It is so cute. I could imagine like a whole quilt of just these mixers. Wouldn't that be so adorable? Or you could do like some kind of like little placemat or something in your kitchen, a little wall hanging, anything like that. This little mixer would be adorable on it. So have fun with that one. And then we did our pink measuring cups, our white measuring cup, and our cute little red teaspoon. Now the red teaspoon is supposed to have this little embroidered hoop on it. I'm not doing that because I don't want to. So that's another modification. So a few modifications to point out today. I did not do hand embroidery on my white measuring cup. I did that with the machine. I did not put the little hoop on my red teaspoon, and I did not use the rickrack and Aurifil for the power cord. I used some bias tape, and I also did the same thing for the mixing paddles and the plug up here. And there were a few modifications. We went through these shapes as well with just how and when I cut them and measured them out. So just keep track of all those tips and tricks. So if you haven't made your blocks yet, hopefully some of those will help you. I hope you enjoyed this week's video. I hope that you are making the Let's Bake quilt with me. If not, I hope you're enjoying watching me work through all the madness of this quilt. I have quite a few of these cute little stitched flower blocks that I turned into applique blocks to get done yet. But once those start coming together, I'm going to be so happy. I do have all the So Simple shapes sewn and turned, and all the flowers are glue basted onto their backgrounds. I have about 1/3 of them appliqued into place. I don't have any but this one trimmed down, so I have a lot more work to do on those stitched flowers, but it's still going to save me a ton of time because I can't even imagine how long it would take to hand stitch 39 of those flowers. So I hope you've enjoyed this week's video. I hope you've picked up a few tips and tricks that you can take into your sewing room. Until next time, find joy in all you do. Carve out some time for crafting and creating. And remember, it's always better when you make stuff up.